but it's wonderful to connect with so many writers and so many appreciators of writers, listeners, readers. Thank you for coming to this virtual space with us this evening. We're going to go in this order. First, Brittney Corrigan will be reading fiction. She'll be followed by Juan Morales, who will be reading poetry. And then finally, Janisse Ray, who will be reading nonfiction. And I'll introduce each one of them just before they read. Afterwards, I promise we will have time for conversation. So if you do have questions, please formulate them, drop them in the chat. We'll be glad to get to as many as we can this evening. And so now, let me turn to Brittney. Brittney Corrigan is the author of the poetry collections Navigation and 40 Weeks, a chapbook responding to events in the news titled Breaking, will be published by Word Tech Editions in April 2021. Daughters, her series of persona poems in the voices of daughters of various characters from folklore, mythology, and popular culture, is forthcoming from Airlie Press in 2021. Brittney was raised in Colorado and has lived in Portland, Oregon for the past 3 decades, where she is an alumna and employee of Reed College. She's currently at work on a 5th poetry manuscript, as well as her first short story collection, both on the topic of climate change and the Anthropocene. She'll be reading from a deeply moving and timely story published in Terrain.org in December, called The Ghost Town Collective. Brittney?
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. Thanks to you and to Simmons and everyone at Terrain for inviting me to be part of this first reading in this series. I'm really excited to see this and all the future events. I'm really excited to be here too with Janisse and Juan tonight. This is really an honor. So I'm going to read to you just the beginning of my story, The Ghost Town Collectives, and then you'll have to get onto the Terrain website to read the rest. The Ghost Town Collectives. A fright. That's what you're supposed to call a group of ghosts. Not a herd, not a flock, not some sort of harmless congregation of beings. A fright of ghosts. As if fear is the only option. That there would be no room in your heart, in your body, for anything else were you to come upon them, were they to come upon you. But there are other possibilities. Like the year Liam McDaniel turned 51 and found his way to an abandoned mountain town in Colorado, the aspen trees just beginning to clatter into a warm and golden autumn. You know what year it was, the year everyone he loved most died. Liam's circumstances were unusual for their raw improbability. Perhaps you understand this from within circumstances of your own. You know Liam. Sympathize with his loss. Perhaps you lost someone too. Maybe your wife died, your husband, your partner, the person whose hand you held within yours for years, or whose hand you had only just begun to hold, already feeling how it could last. Maybe your parents died, either at the end of long lives or not so long. Maybe you lost a child, a grown child, or a baby, or one who was at that in-between age, not too young to take notice, but not old enough to understand. Or maybe you were already alone, but before you didn't mind so much, and now you do. Or maybe you always minded. You always had that ache in your chest. Whatever your circumstance, you know what it's like to keep company with absence in an empty room. A group of patients is called a virtue. A group of doctors is called a doctrine. There is no definitive collective noun for corpses. There are many names for a group of trees. A clump, a forest, a coop, a grove, a thicket, a stillness, a stand. After everyone he loved most had died, after he couldn't touch them while they were dying, and after he also couldn't touch anyone else he knew, those who might have loved him or he might have come to love, Liam McDaniel left everything to be among the trees, a stillness of trees, a place where being alone was a choice, not something that happened to you while you tried to push it away. After everyone he loved most had died, Liam read an article about a man who bought a ghost town. It was a hopeful story. The man bought the ghost town before the virus crossed the ocean, crossed every state line. While the man was visiting his ghost town, the order came to shelter in place. So the man hunkered down, discovered treasures in all of the ghost town's walls. It was a hopeful story. The man was having the time of his life. A group of bats is called a colony. There is no designation for a group of viruses, perhaps because it only takes one virus that jumps from its usual host, an infection, an outbreak, an epidemic, a pandemic. Liam had held his wife's hands in his hands, and then he hadn't. His wife's hands had been strong, her nails trimmed short. She made things with paint, and she made things with rope and wool, and she made things with clay, and she made things with metal and stone. Once she made the shell of a person that you could step inside of, like a papier-mâché mask, but life-size, cast from head to toe. You were the skeleton. You were the organs, the lungs, and heart. Your breath was warm coming through the nostrils of the face. You could hear and you could see through the holes of its eyes, but you were fixed in place and couldn't move. When it was exhibited, people in galleries revolved around the shell to see what might be standing inside, to take their turns being inside. Everyone was allowed to touch. A group of houses is called a huddle. There is no word for a group of ghost towns, but they are littered throughout the Colorado mountains. Liam found a listing for one that was headed to auction. Just a single cabin still standing, the remains of a saloon, the small dark opening of a mine against the rocky earth, disintegrating in an alpine meadow. Sitting in the empty kitchen of his house, one among the huddle of little brick houses whose windows reflected Denver's late summer sun, Liam placed his empty hands palms up on the table's dark wood. He stared at his left hand and imagined it pooling with blood, imagined the deep line of a wound across his wrist. Liam had no parents left to miss him, no wife who would find him, no children he could harm with his leaving. A group of children is called an ingratitude, but there are other possibilities. Liam stared at his right hand, and no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't see it as completely empty. Light spilled through the kitchen windows, filled the cup of his palm. If he turned his palm over, the light was stubborn, flickered on the back of his hand, reached all the way up to his elbow, hot and bright. It was not a ghost, but Liam didn't know that then. He hadn't yet seen the real thing. The light was not the ghost of his wife or the ghosts of his children. It was just an abundance of sunlight with exceptional timing. Liam chose his right hand and used it to call up the real estate agent and place his bid. A group of carpenters is called a panel. A group of architects is called a rendering. A group of sculptors is a mold. Liam's wife had built spectacular things out of ordinary things, pieces of things, while Liam's hands drafted plans, then carried them out with nails and screws and joists and planks and beams. Liam's hands had been over every inch of their brick bungalow, working its pieces until the house was distinctively theirs. He had mended pipes and shored up sinking porch columns and restored the built-in cabinetry with sandpaper and stain and sweat. He had painted bedrooms, painted nurseries, painted the kitchen with its riot of light. And within the house's walls, Liam's hands had been over every inch of his wife, had tended his children when they were newborns, hollering at the middle of night moon. Though you may have thought otherwise, Liam wasn't afraid of ghosts or the prospect of living in a ghost town. As he prepared to leave the bungalow, he moved room to room, accounting for the accumulation of things by trying to see with his wife's eyes, noting how each item might have a use, how it might become something new. But then he packed up most of the contents of the house to put in storage while he was away. He set aside very few things to bring with him. The wooden box his daughter had made last year in high school wood shop, because that was how he knew she had inherited his hands. The ceramic serving bowl his son had recently made in pottery class, because that was how he knew those hands were gifts from his wife. The shell of a person his wife had made and exhibited many times, but never sold. The rest of what he took from the house fit easily into the back of his pickup truck. There were no ghosts, so the ghosts took up no space at all. Liam drove away from the little brick house, away from the huddle of brick houses, through the crisscross of city streets and out of the city altogether. A group of maps is called a latitude. A group of mountains is called a range. Liam followed the maps into the mountains, drove until the highways turned to roads and the roads turned to dirt and tailings and dead-ended in the meadow of his ghost town, ringed with aspen trees, glittering in the mid-September sun. When Liam stepped out of his truck, the alpine air raised up goosebumps on his skin, and then the sun smoothed them down again. The aspen trees shivered their symbols of leaves all around him. Liam sank to his knees in the scrub brown grass, wrapped his arms about himself, and began to cry. There is no agreed-upon name for a collective of tears. One thing you should know about ghosts is that they rarely waste time. Another is that they are rarely direct. Anything caught between worlds exists with both urgency and uncertainty. Liam could feel the expectant energy in the air nudging him to get settled before dark. So he rose from his knees and walked across the meadow toward the cabin. Dozens of grasshoppers zigzagged through the last of the summer's fading wildflowers, bumping into his legs and springing away. The first living creatures to touch him in months. He stumbled a little, startled by the proximity of their bodies, but then leaned into them, trying to catch them between his hands. A group of grasshoppers is called a cloud of grasshoppers moving across the brilliant blue sky out of Liam's reach. Standing in front of the little cabin, Liam, with his architect's mind, marveled at its longevity. It was constructed of carefully saddle-notched hand-sawed logs, its windows uncannily intact. Liam tested the door, reinforced with tin to deter rodents, and found that it still hinged open and closed, that it could be secured by a wooden peg fitted in a hasp. The shallow pitch of the roof, crafted from a sturdy ridge log and purlins and wedged with collar ties beneath the eaves, explained the years the cabin had survived beneath heavy snow. Liam ran his carpenter's hands along the unpeeled logs, a masterful example of vernacular architecture wrought with hand tools from materials nearby. Liam wished he could have met the builder of this cabin, could have sat with him and watched summer thunderstorms roll in over the peaks as they drank strong coffee and wiped the dirt from their palms. Liam's son had died first, just a couple of weeks after turning 13. You remember how it was. At first, we thought children were invincible, that the virus would inhabit them quietly and then go on its way. We took steps to protect the children anyway. But a few days into the stay-at-home order, the first week that schools were closed, Liam's son developed a fever. After that, it was quick, like a boulder in a landslide, picking up speed as it tumbles through the scree. There is no standard collective noun for a group of rocks. Until they are stones, monuments set in place, a cairn of stones, a henge, until they are gravestones, and then we don't know what to call them again. A cemetery is not a collection, but a place containing so much more than markers with names and dates. We might agree to call them by our own appellation, a grief of gravestones, a sorrow, but perhaps if we name death too precisely, we hold it too close. Per hospital rules, children were not made to suffer alone as adults were, but only one parent was allowed to be at their son's bedside at a time. So Liam and his wife took shifts. When his wife called in the middle of the night as their son's body was failing, Liam could hear through her sobs the chaos of machines in the background. Long, high-pitched tones and alarms threaded themselves through her choked breaths, her urgent weeping. Liam hadn't been sleeping when she called. He had been standing in the dark kitchen, running his hand along the wooden doorframe, wood that he had once restored to its original flawless grain. He was trying to find comfort in that which had been tattered and then repaired. Liam was not there when his son died. It happened while he was racing through the quiet city toward the hospital, streetlights blurring into pinwheels through his watery eyes. Liam stepped inside the little cabin. As his eyes adjusted to the interior dim, a table with 2 wooden chairs and a ladder to a sleeping loft came into focus. A cast iron wood stove hunkered in the corner of the single room. Something had chewed at the table legs, marmots he suspected, and every surface was overspread with dirt and the scattered evidence of mice. The cabin's front window looked out over the meadow, across to the only other building left in Liam's ghost town, the remains of a saloon tilting into the afternoon light. But the saloon could wait. Liam unloaded his few belongings, the twin mattress that had been his daughter's, kitchen essentials, books, tools, 1 bundle of bedding, 1 large suitcase of clothes, several bins of non-perishable food, the wooden box, the ceramic bowl, the human shell, 1 sturdy broom, 3 small cremation boxes, each with a set of initials marked in Liam's scrupulous hand. Liam swept away the dirt and droppings from the room and loft and secured the cabin door in the hasp. He hauled the mattress up the well-made ladder and fell into the heaviest sleep he'd had since everyone he loved most had died. Inside, a mischief of mice darted wall to wall in confusion. Outside, the aspen trees were alive in the wind. Perhaps all the creatures that roam about at night woke up. A mask of raccoons, a wiliness of coyotes, a crackle of crickets, a prickle of porcupines, a parliament of owls. Perhaps they moved in and out of the ghost town all night, around and around Liam's cabin, in and out of the bed of Liam's truck. Perhaps they were simply being exactly their animal selves, hunting and hiding in the darkness, smelling the new smell of Liam, but letting him be. But there are other possibilities. Thank you.
Brittney, thank you. That is such a wonderful and wondrous story. And anyone who hasn't seen it yet, you have to read what happens next. You have to go to terrain.org later and read what happens next. Thank you so much. Our next reader is Juan Morales. Juan J. Morales is the son of an Ecuadorian mother and a Puerto Rican father. He's the author of 3 poetry collections, including The Handyman's Guide to End Times, which was winner of the 2019 International Latino Book Award. His recent poems have appeared in Crazy Horse, The Laurel Review, Break Beats Volume 4, Latinx, Acentos Review, Collateral, Salamander, and Pank. And his work is forthcoming in poetry. He is a Canto Mundo Fellow, a Macondo Fellow. He's the editor and publisher of Pilgrimage Press, and he is professor and department chair of English and World Languages at Colorado State University in Pueblo. Tonight, he will be reading a poem he published just this month in terrain.org's Letter to America series, and several other poems as well. Juan.
Wow, thanks for having me. It's pretty amazing that the participant number is so high. That is amazing, and it's because of the wonderful work that Elizabeth, Simmons, Derek, and everyone at terrain.org is doing. It's a real pleasure to be here, and it's also these literary magazines that are kind of keeping us going in these trying times. So thank you for all the citizenship that you all do for us and in kind of uniting us. So I'm really looking forward to where this series goes, and I'm honored to be a part of it as well. So yeah, I'm gonna read some serious stuff, some funny stuff, and I'm gonna be invoking the spirit of my father who passed about 2 years ago, and so there will be cussing as well. So yeah, so if it gives you a few thumbs down on the YouTube, Simmons, I'm sorry, but yeah. So but I'm gonna start with a poem that fortunately that I was grateful was part of this wonderful anthology that terrain.org put together called Dear America. And yeah, if you haven't checked it out, you really should. So So this first poem is called 20,000 Pallets of Bottled Water, September 20th, 2018. On a runway in Selva, under blue tarps pulled taut, FEMA's water shipment still sits 1 year after Maria. Against a backdrop of the people boiling river water, the agency apologizes for distribution issues, officials promising to touch each bottle, though everyone knows it's as foul as their island support. In the gaze of the aerial shots, pallet after pallet, shut that off, stretching out like a crumbled runway, the tallies of the dead jump from 64 to 3,000. And the mainland president tweets, "Congratulations to all on a job well done." The island is a dry throat, a voice in the eye of the aftermath, hissing words unspoken elsewhere. Commonwealth, statehood, independence. So this next one is from the Handyman's Guide to End Times. It's a standard collection of zombie apocalypse home improvement poetry, and I'm hoping the publisher wants to do a 2020 edition where it comes with a foreword that says "Told you so." So we'll see what they say. Explaining seafood to my future grandkids after the extinction. I will describe like a murder how we used to rip open juicy bodies and clacking claws of lobsters and crabs to feast on warm meat inside. I will smack my lips describing how we seared tiny ones with red tails called shrimp in butter, garlic, and batter. I will contaminate the moment by describing cocktail and tartar sauce as red or white. I will explain how the ocean snake-like wonders called eels were bendable monsters made only of arms and fish who swam in nimble clouds, up and then down to the depths where deep sea creatures created their own light, in a time when the sea was not stung full of jellyfish and swirling garbage, and we swam with the taste of salt pressed to our lips. So yeah, we got a Puerto Rico theme going so far today. So I'm gonna read you a new one that came out in this wonderful journal called Salamander. The editor Jose Antonio Angel Aragus is the editor, and he has a poem also in the terrain.org Dear America anthology. Check it out. So actually, I'm going to read two from this one. One of them is going to be about Puerto Rico, and then I'm going to call the second one an import from Puerto Rico, and you'll see. The House of Bees. My father's childhood home was condemned a few years before. Looking at the simple house above us on the slight hill, I wanted to enter, except my tia stopped me, pointing to the new home alive with wasps and bees weaving in and out, returning it to the humid mountains. My father told me he used to send $35 a month to help pay for the mortgage when he was in the army. What I want to do from across the sea is to let the insects have this home, safe from extinction, and to welcome the lizards that scamper along the walls so my dad has a place to return to in Lajas, inside the house of bees, with hives humming and built up in every corner, where ant colonies climb from the ground, in the shape of ancestors my father swore the family saw greeting them in the childhood nights. So the import poem. I discovered I have to sometimes establish what this is. The chupacabra. The chupacabra translates roughly to goat sucker. So I recently discovered they're not real, and it was kind of hard to take that news. So anyway, this is a poem that kind of oh, and the other thing I should introduce you to is in West Virginia they have the Mothman, and so yeah, that's all you need to know. Here we go. El Chupacabra visits Chicago. I find disappointment in the Midwest, how they keep wanting me to be Mothman. We both wear red eyes and wings, but I take no joy in knocking down bridges or scorching summertime. Some seem impressed with how much blood I drink from the throat in one sitting and overlook me, a well-traveled, a fine curator of exquisite dishes, carnally appreciating the organs of animals I meet. When it's not Mothman, they mistake me for the gargoyles in this city, even though most of it burned down almost 150 years ago. Now, the city's thrumming more and more Spanish voices that tempt me to reveal myself. But I know better. For now, I keep hoping I will not always be seen as fear-filling dank alleys and crowding around every uptight skyscraper. Like a cat gifting dead birds and mice, I'm sharing the misunderstood hungers of the world. All right, so where'd my list go? Okay, cool. So I'm gonna read, I was reading in, I can't remember what article it was, but I'm gonna give you that bougie thing. It's like, yeah, I was reading in the Atlantic the other day. So I was reading in the Atlantic the other day that, kind of dream production is kind of, everyone is just having really crazy dreams, right? And so the new book that I'm working on is just a lot of these crazy dreams. And what I've noticed is my father has been visiting me, and it's pretty wild. Sometimes I can't tell if it's really him or if it's kind of my subconscious, and that's part of the fun. That's kind of part of the fun of exploring how our dreams, even though if we're trapped in our homes, can kind of help us, you know, depart and explore and things like that. So I'm going to read you two dream poems, and then I'm going to look at my time, and then probably maybe read two more, and then I'll pass the Zoom mic to our next wonderful reader. So this one's called Dream of Synchronicity. Everyone drinks and clinks glasses in the hotel bar, spilling into the lobby. I'm in the corner looking through a box of lost earrings, trying for a matching pair. I give up when I find the pinball machine that everyone says unlocks time travel. With a stack of quarters, I'm tapping flipper buttons and sending the ball into bumpers. I'm fighting pings of gravity. I'm tilting the machine to keep the ball alive on the playfield. The display is a black monolith that doesn't keep score. Then, it's after school and I'm walking through my high school's parking lot. A student next to me says, "I'm not sure you're supposed to be here, man." I nod to him, unsure if he means 1999 or 2019. Before I can ascertain how it all works, I'm standing before the pinball machine again, now on a cold morning beach that might as well be on a distant moon. The waves casually murmur on about synchronicity. Dream of the bird tattoo. After the medium told me a strange bird would visit me, I obsessed over every sparrow and finch in our yard, including one that would sit on the kitchen window, head tilted in curiosity. The yellow prairie warbler chased moths around the neighbor's red maple. I counted Mississippi kites whistling and circling high above, green hummingbirds flitting through to nourish on our succulents, and crows always dogfighting with the hawks. Every bird reminded me of avian populations in decline, but they ignored my need for personal prophecy. A few nights later, when I closed my eyes, my deceased father stood before me with his face obscured. His shoulder tattoo of La Golondrina stirred. Then the swallow climbed off his shoulder as a green phoenix made of neon light. It shook its wings and told me, "This is the bird you're looking for," before flying out of dream and waking me, just like sunrise. Okay, so I'm going to read another poet's work because it's too damn good to pass up. And this is once again in the Dear America anthology, published by Trinity University Press and put together by the wonderful folks at train.org. The bookshop link is in the chat. Yeah, you got it. This is by the poet Blas Falconer, and it's called Fatherland. And this poem destroys me every time, in all the right ways, that is. Fatherland, Blas Falconer. The heat not having broken all month long, we stood in line and watched a boy race down the park's tallest slide, drop into the shallow pool below, from which he rose renewed, a look of joy, relief across his face. My son held my hand and looking up judged how long it'd take to reach the top of the stairs. In front of us, the man, a head taller, 50 pounds at least, more than I, wore red trunks, his hair dark brown short. I saw the swastika first, white power inked across his back, the scene. Skeletons climbed his spine above a sea of flames. I felt each breakable bone in my boy's hands. He, who days before asked to live with us forever. Idiot, my mother called me once because you think everyone is good. The man looked across the park at no one, younger than I'd have thought. And when the line, as if with one mind, began to move again, he stepped forward. The foot or two between us, perilous, uncrossable. Okay, I gotta process that poem in this for a second as well. So, all right. So I'm gonna read one more poem, and where is it? There it is. So it is part of the Letters to America series, and it came out this month with Terrain.org, and I'm really appreciative that this poem was able to be part of the Letter to America series. And it's just a friendly reminder that, you know, maybe things are kind of looking better for 2021, but we got to get the children out of the cages. We got so much damn stuff to fix. And I really hope it does get fixed because, you know, people are getting hurt and it's unacceptable. So, catalog. Her clicking pen, a nervous habit responding to the inventory, bagged and tagged from the desert. Every wallet and blanket gathered, fields of backpacks abandoned, footprints vanishing over the ridge. Stacked in the morgues, there's no counting. Ghost bones picked white around the border. She searches for the names trailed off among bleached rocks and cacti. One may be a Thea, a teal. The pain of an invisible line that may have been a few miles back the whole time. In the warehouse, the volunteer sweats, clicking for the ones she knows. In the depths and dips of high desert, in the name of hope and survival, she prays to the patron saint of slim chances. Thanks for having me, and have a great evening. And yeah, it's great to be here. Take care.
Thank you so much, Juan. Thank you for all of those poems, especially yours, but also, of course, including that fine one from Blas Falconer. Thank you so much. We'll turn next to Janisse Ray. Janisse Ray lives in the subtropics on the humid and life-rich coastal plain of southern Georgia. Savannah is the city nearest to her organic farm, which she and her husband call Red Earth. Janisse began writing about nature 25 years ago, and at the same time started to organize a movement of Southern nature writing to speak for the botanic, mostly forested and beleaguered South. You may know Janisse from her first book, Ecology of a Cracker Childhood, a memoir about growing up on a junkyard in the longleaf pine ecosystem. It was named a New York Times notable book and has been chosen for many university, community, and state book reads. She is author of 4 other books of literary nonfiction and a collection of poetry. Her second volume of poetry, Red Lanterns, is due out this spring from Iris Press. Ray has won a Pushcart Prize, an American Book Award, and a Southern Environmental Law Center Creative Writing Award, among others. She has been inducted into the Georgia Writers Hall of Fame, and she will be reading to us tonight from her wonderful essay published in terrain.org called I Have Seen the Warrior, Crossing the Okefenokee. Janisse.
Thank you, Elizabeth, Simmons, Derek, and thanks to Terrain for publishing this essay and for inviting me to be on tonight. I thank Brittney and Juan for your words, and I thank all of you who came to share this moment together this evening, and thank you all for loving the wild world, or you wouldn't be here. Thank you. When crossing the largest swamp east of the Mississippi, a 3-day journey through 700 square miles of wilderness packed with alligators, the goal is clear: don't lose anyone. We started out with 9, 3 women and a man, plus 5 boys, all about 14, our sons and their friends. The boy Zach was riding in my canoe. He was dark-haired and dark-eyed, tall for his age. Sometimes he didn't like the antics of the other boys. I was good friends with Zach's father. Jackie was a wild man, alligator trapper, bear hunter, coyote tracker. He had been made wilder by a stint in Vietnam, where one Easter Sunday, going to church, he stepped on a landmine that left enough shrapnel in his body to set off metal detectors. He would have drunk himself to death, he told me, except the swamp saved him. He would go in for weeks at a time, camping, watching sandhill cranes and wood ducks, following bear trails. The swamp was his salvation, his refuge in times of trouble. So I was surprised at what happened. Years later, I still think of it. I believe death is the ultimate wilderness, waiting to be explored. I don't want to go there yet. As a lover of nature, I want to get as close as possible to essential wildness without actually dying. So I'm careful to keep on life's side of life, skirting the trackless territory and mitigating the forces that press us toward it. So for the sake of time, I'm going to skip sections of this essay. And this one is, we were just ready to push off from Kingfisher Landing, which many of you probably know, when Zach in the front of the boat asked if he could have a drink. And I, without paying attention, said, of course. And a minute later, I heard him gagging. So he had taken some gulps of lantern oil that I'd put in a small drink bottle. And so we adults convened and we decided that surely he hadn't drunk very much and we'd take him anyway. Okefenokee is a large bog, a depression, a peat maker, a saucer, not a cup. There's very little high ground, only floating sod. The sphagnum that defines the bog is so thick it appears weight-bearing, but when you step onto it, you sink, floundering in the detritus of centuries of vegetation. This was a gorgeous sunny day. Carter Prairie was popping with water lily, spatterdock sticking up its yellow bonnets, swamp iris of the color purple, golden club like birthday candles. In shallower places, carnivorous plants were going crazy, blooming these flappy flowers. Hat pins were everywhere, like tiny marshmallows on sticks, or white balloons on strings, or little flags on delicate poles. All the metaphors I can think of for hat pins are happy. The water was mica colored, lava-like, obsidian, reflecting white puffy clouds in a blue sky. The trail flecked with foam. When most of us think of wilderness, we think of Alaska or the West, but there's wild wilderness, even in places like southern Georgia, that have been inhabited for long centuries and degraded in the process. For me, not enough wilderness is left, and every day I resent this. It's a crying shame that humans have trampled so much of this world with such abandon. Every guidebook said the 12 miles to Mall Hammock were hard. That's because in a flat there's no current, thus only sheer muscular force will propel you. Sometimes we had to get out and drag our boats through tangles of flowers, beautiful but exhausting. I kept asking Zach how he was doing, and he kept saying good. Maybe he had got the poison out. Still, I was angry at him for not paying attention, and I was angry at myself for not ripping off the label of the Gatorade bottle and not hiding it where a kid couldn't find it. We passed mile marker 1 and 2 and 3. At 4, we tied up and ate lunch. As soon as we ate, Zach's problem started. He clambered out of the boat and rushed onto a floating island. When he got back, he was pale. He sat down on a thwart, his head hanging. You okay? My stomach hurts and my head hurts. I keep burping up that stuff. It tastes nasty. Was that diarrhea? Yes, ma'am. He was such a damn polite kid. I don't like it that you're starting to get sick now, I said. I glanced at the marker. I think I'll be okay. Almost as soon as he said it, he tipped the boat sideways and retched into black water. The bottle had clearly said poison. It said upon ingestion to call the National Poison Hotline. Poison kills. As dangerous as it was to continue, I hated Zach missing this. I kept thinking, maybe he'll be okay. At mile 5, I knew I'd made the wrong decision. So we traded the canoe for a couple of kayaks, and I tied his kayak to mine. And so I started towing him out. I was going to go get medical help for him and then return and catch up to my friends. I was strong. The first mile was nothing. The second mile was easy. On the third mile, I wanted to rest, but Zach was worse. He would lift himself and vomit, then fall back, pale as a tissue. I pulled right, I pulled left, right, left, right, left, right. I jabbed the double-plated paddle into the water on the right, as far to the bow as I could reach, pulled as hard as I could, as far behind me as I could, felt the boat surge, plowing through its own wake. With the left blade, I stabbed forward, using my entire body to torque, pulling hard until the blade was behind me. Ahead, a wood duck screamed and flew around a bend. I stabbed again, left, right, left. We were flying, me with the boy's pack in my boat, the boy alone in his plastic boat, sick. When I reached the wood duck, she screamed and fled anew, over and over. I was paddling upstream on the river Styx through hot lava, trying to escape a giant arm reaching toward me. I was in a horror movie. The camera was panning. A woman was in focus, churning 2 boats forward while the landscape streamed by in a blur. The woman was becoming bigger and bigger until she was archetypal. She was a warrior, teeth and claws on strings around her neck, bangles rattling on her wrist. Her torso grew into a lioness's, horns sprang from her head, and in her hand she wielded a lightning bolt. She left behind a wake of sparks. I became something more than I'd ever been as I rode Zach out of the primordial gunk. As I fought, I birthed. I birthed him and I birthed myself. I birthed too the power of any woman to not be afraid, to not let the fear of death stop her from doing what was needed or desired. We forget that most of the time we all are warriors fighting for life, to protect it, to continue it, to birth it, to care for it, to honor it. As humans, as women, that's our biggest job. I returned through all the places we had visited that morning, scene upon scene in reverse. Carter Prairie slowed me down. Then my boat stopped short, stuck. I leaped from it and sank knee-deep into layers of ropey, pithy, snaky muck. I began running slow motion through the battery, dragging the boats behind me until the water deepened enough I could pull myself back in. 20 yards ahead, it happened again, then again. We finally reached an angler who had a cell phone, and I got him to call Jackie. Jackie met us at the landing, and the odd thing is that right as we got there, Zach threw up like one last time and then was fine, as if nothing had ever happened to him. So we decided to take Jackie was going to help me get back in by carrying me by motorboat to the edge of the wilderness boundary, to the boundary. So that's what we did. We loaded my little kayak in his motorboat and took back off again. Jackie was the wildest looking, wildest acting man I've ever seen. He had long yellow-white hair he kept pulled back. He was sinewy and muscular, although he never saw the inside of a gym. He had a raw, visceral animal power, electricity, duende, running through him. Any watch he wore stopped running. He also grew roses and strung up millions of holiday lights every year and baked cinnamon buns. But still, I get teary at this point. Jackie's dead now. He died a couple of years ago of what was probably his heart. He came in from bush hogging to take a nap and never woke up. He died with his work boots by his bed. When he died, a part of Okefenokee Swamp died. Some of us meditate in old growth forests. Some of us watch birds. Some of us gaze out at beautiful views of a lake. But the instinct is the same, I think, to understand that the earth is wild and that we are of the earth and also wild. Some of us are willing to feel this more strongly than others. Jackie felt it more than anyone I know, so much that he was feral outside domestication. He wasn't wild like a pheasant hunter who gathers up his dogs and hikes in knee boots through soft-edged grasslands. He wasn't wild like a hunter shooting a grizzly from a helicopter. He was the pheasant. He was the grizzly. I loved him for this. I loved him too because he not only represented my place, Southern Georgia, he was my place. For years, he had to keep one foot in the world of humans. Now he's wholly the land. That evening, so let me just skip this and say that he got me to mile marker 6 and we unloaded my kayak. And for a few minutes, I sat in my boat feeling the wilderness descend. I'd been sad when Zach drank the poison, worried when he began to throw up, panicked as his sickness grew, then sad again. I'd paddled 10 hard miles, 5 of them towing a boat with a boy. 6 more lay ahead. 700 square miles is a lot of wilderness. I had a vision of every alligator in the place rising out of the flower-ridden water, sitting on its tail, waving. There would be a lot of alligators, some of them as long as 14 feet, with 74 teeth per alligator, each sharpened to a point. There was nothing to do but start. Night fell and the moon levitated above the inconceivable and primitive swamp. I paddled by moonlight, staying within the water trail, using my flashlight to spot the markers. Large splashes sounded and strange birds loosed weird calls. A bellowing began that I had never heard. I went on and on. I refused to rest because the vastness of the swamp and my own smallness scared me. I paddled more quietly. I held my breath. I passed mile marker 11, close enough I could touch it with the blade of my paddle. I went on through the thick mercurial waters. Finally, I thought I heard a kid laugh. I saw across open water a small glow. I hollered. I was pretty much hailed as a hero, but I was no hero. What I'd done was remedial, a defenseless mistake in a grand, heroic, mythic life, and I was damned lucky that a remedy had been available. Most of us, most of our lives are asked to live small. Most of us quit trying very young to live the bigness we know is possible. Now, no matter what I choose or what is asked of me, I know what I became that long, long night I paddled alone through darkness in the desolate wilderness this side, the desolate wilderness this side of the ultimate wilderness. I have seen the warrior. Thank you.
Oh, Janisse, thank you. Thank you so much. And you're getting a lot of responses in the chat. I hope people have been keeping questions throughout all of the reading and would like to pose some comments and thoughts and questions to our authors. As you're gathering those questions together, thank you, all three of you authors. This has just been a wonderful, wonderful evening. Thank you very much. Conversation and questions, audience?
Elizabeth, can I hop in? I'm not going to unleash my video on the chat and scare everyone in my evening robe tonight, but I'm curious if anyone wants to take a stab at it, of the readers, which thank you for your time and your words and your great work that you're doing on behalf of not only your bioregions, but the wider world. I think I speak for all of us at Terrain that we're so great to have your presence tonight. I'm curious, in 2021, where you see the work of words going forward in this new year, when I think for many of us, we're finally taking a breath, and maybe that's a sign of privilege, of taking a breath, of feeling like some of what we've witnessed over time has been different or unexperienced trauma. But I'm curious where you're finding sustenance, where you see the work of words going forward with a new administration, new stories, new ways of, pardon me, raising hell.
Who wants to take a first stab at that? Please, Janisse, go ahead.
I'll go. You know, I've long believed that writing is not just an art form, but it's mission-based. You know, for me, all my work has been toward the end of a more just, more sustainable, less oppressive world. I am going to tell you though, that I've begun, you know, in the past year or two, and, you know, some of you know this already, I've just been really questioning books and whether books and writing, as powerful as they have been in my past and probably in many of your past, you know, as wonderful of tools of a tool of transformation as they are, I have been questioning their deep efficacy. I was silent, and I would prefer not to answer this question because I don't have any answers for it. But I do see that, you know, this thing that was less marginal when I was self-actualizing is more marginal now. So the only thing that I know to do, I mean, I've questioned myself. I go to my altar. I talk to the ancestors. I retreat with friends. I write in my journal, trying to figure this out. My goal is always to be as useful as I can be. And I would like to do that through writing and art. I'm just not sure anymore. And that is an honest answer from me.
And I'll jump in and say, what on sort of a different side of things, at least during this past year, one of the things that Words has done for me is to feel less isolated, and to still be able to really feel the presence of other people this past year when I've been in the presence of so few other people. And so one thing that's really kept me going, not only is was creating my own work, some of which was about the pandemic, obviously, but also being able to read the work of others and feel that this was something we were all going through together, and that we still also had a lot of work to do in many ways that this sort of also brought to the surface over the past year. So for me, just being able to read and experience the words of others really brought that to the forefront. So.
Well, I think I have been in love with words all my life, writing since I was 4 years old. And I think the reason that I love to do it more than almost anything else is to get out from under my own skin. It's lonesome being there and see if I can actually touch someone else, actually reach someone else and understand what is going on in the head of someone else, which is not easy. And I would like to ask a very simple question of that wonderful third reader. Did the boy survive?
Thank you for asking that question. He by the time we got back to the landing, he was fine. His father, of course, Jackie, my dear friend, is no longer with us, but Zachary actually lives in his father's house at the edge of Okefenokee Swamp. So if you go to Kingfisher Landing and put in, you'll pass his house. He's a wonderful person. He read the essay in Terrain. Yeah, he loved it. Yes, he survived. Thank you. I did not mean to create that much tension that you wondered if he died. I'm sorry.
Thank you for that question too, Rena.
I stepped into your shoes completely there. His, but also yours.
Thank you, Rena.
If
Go
it's
ahead.
okay, I want to jump back to Taylor's question. And I guess one thing that I would add is there's a lot of amazing writers coming out with books, and they need our support celebrating these books. You know, we should celebrate them when we can in person, and when we can, well, if we feel comfortable touching each other ever again. But also, I think just kind of taking these opportunities to reach out and things like that. But also to kind of answer that question is where it's going. I think we have to continue this cultural reckoning, you know, having these hard conversations within ourselves and with other people. And, you know, it's kind of like Felicia Rose Chavez's The Anti-Racist Writing Workshop, you know, those kinds of texts as well are the ones that we should be kind of exploring to kind of think about not only how do we come out of this when we have our, you know, when we have our nice fresh vaccines and everything else, but how we can kind of connect all the mission points of terrain.org in our environment into that regard as well. And because I think that's very important.
Thank you, Juan. Terrific comment. One of the things that struck me about this whole reading is the forms that fragility took in all of your work. And I know, Juan, you and Brittney, you in particular, were writing pieces that were composed during this period of the pandemic, and address some of that very acute sense of fragility and vulnerability that we're all feeling right now. And Janisse, you're writing about an event from many years ago, right? And so we maybe hear it in ways that are inflected with our very contemporary sense of fragility. But of course, fragility is timeless, right? And that's part of the arc of the reading. Can I ask a question? And so all three of you, I'd love to hear you think a little bit about fragility this way, but in particularly Brittney and Juan, since you were reading pieces that came out of this time, would either of you like to say a little bit about that act of writing? Brittney, I have been so curious as to when you started that story. And for the readers who haven't got far into it yet, it's magical realism. And yet it is so absolutely contemporary. Can you talk a little bit about writing during this time as well?
Yeah, I think I started work on that story pretty early on the pandemic. And as Pam Houston can tell you, it actually, when I submitted it, had a different ending that I think wrapped up a little too well, because at the time that I wrote it, we didn't really know that we were going to be in this for so long, or maybe we should have known, but we didn't, right? That we were going to be in this for so long. And I reworked that to sort of not wrap up so easily, because we're still in this. But for me, it was really about, the story was about writing about that sense of how we are, we're collective animals. Like we thrive in the company of others. Even those of us like me who are introverts, still human beings are herd animals. So for me, I really wanted to write about that sense of what happens when we're isolated from others, and what happens when we lose that touch. And so and that's where the ghosts and things, that those of you who haven't finished the story yet, that the ghosts come in and sort of like find that we're in the trauma we're suffering right now during this, we're having to find other ways to deal with it that aren't being in each other's company, and how hard and isolating that can be. So
I love the ghosts that I'm meeting in your story, and I can't wait to finish it personally. So to kind of riff with that, with what Brittney's saying is this idea of fragility for me in writing has been, because I'm the opposite. I'm a very extroverted person, so kind of retreating and kind of finding new ways to kind of channel energy has been kind of like a tough process. And frankly, one of the frustrating things is, I'm a department chair, that's my day job. And so I'm not able to write and produce as much as I like. And so there's been a lot of forgiveness that I've had to kind of go through with myself, to kind of say, it's okay that you're not writing, but also to remember that I'm in a very privileged place where I have a job, where my big problem today was my refrigerator died and I had to replace it, but there are people that have bigger problems. And so kind of putting all of that into perspective, and kind of how I can forward this knowledge and this personal reflection and fragility forward to help other writers and just other people in my community is part of the process so far that I've been kind of going through. And I've been, my new hobby is running, and it's very, very affordable. And, so yeah.
Can I say something?
Janisse, some of this, sorry, go ahead.
I just want to say that I'm located in Southern California, and I feel that in the past, before the pandemic, book readings were scattered everywhere in bookstores and cafes and whatnot. And I feel that, if I can say it, it's a blessing in disguise, because now we have a forum where authors and readers can meet. And I'm excited about this. There's another group that I'm part of in England, for God's sake. And I'm listening to authors from overseas as we gather, on this forum. And I think that's very special. I think it brings power to the voice, and it connects us in ways that we've never really truly been connected before. I don't think I would ever hear really an author in Tennessee, let's say, or Arkansas. Maybe not, hit and miss. But because of these forums, I think it's going to introduce us to a lot of people, a lot of authors that we otherwise would truly not really run into. That's all I want to say. So I really appreciate this very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Cecile, and thank you for sticking with it and coming back in. It was good to have you come back in. Andrew, was your hand up a minute ago and I missed it?
Yeah, I had it up there.
I'm sorry.
So first, thanks to you and Simmons for putting this together. I think it was a great event, and for all the readers, I really enjoyed all the readings that I've read on Terrain's site previously. I just have like a technical sort of question for Brittney. I love the story, Brittney, and I was wondering, one part of the story that I found particularly moving, especially hearing it, even more so than reading it, were the refrain that you come back to with the animal groupings and the plant groupings. And I was just wondering, just as a writer, like where, if you could remember even, how that, how early in the process of writing the story that you knew that would be something, structurally, how you would structure the story. If you thought of that very early, or if it just sort of came as you wrote the story. If you could really talk to that, maybe. I'm curious about that.
Yeah, sure. That was actually the genesis of the story. That sort of related to what I was saying before. I knew that I wanted to write about the importance of being together in groups when we couldn't be together in groups. And I have an affinity anyway for animals, and that's sort of what I'm writing about right now, the Anthropocene and climate change. And so it was sort of a natural, that's where it started, and then the ghost town and the character sort of came out of that. But the collective nouns were first. They're all from this book, An Exaltation of Larks, which is a fantastic book of all the collective nouns that anybody has ever invented. And then I had the pleasure of inventing some myself. So
great.
Yeah, but that's where it came from. Yeah.
Thank you.
I'd like to say that if there's a strange thing happening with this Zooming has made distance go away. Scotland, it's easy. I was speaking to somebody in Scotland just the other day, and so many places, but the near people are far away. In other words, what used to be proximity is now gone, but what used to be distance is also gone. So I find myself in a kind of confused area where I even wake up in the morning and I say, oh, I have 2 Zoom sessions today, but the weather is so bad, I don't think I want to go out. And then I have to remind myself that, no, I'm going to be in my own house. If there is something confusing and we're beginning to lose track of where we end and the rest of things begin.
As Juan says, no more snow days. We've lost that, and we've gained constant Zoom. This has been wonderful. If there's one last question or comment, anyone, please unmute at will. Wonderful, Melanie, wonderful. Zoom presents itself as the bond for democracy so that we can all participate no matter where or when.
One of the things that I really enjoyed about Brittney's story is one of the things that I really despise about the media and about the pandemic is the idea that we're all in this together. And this also ties into what some of Juan's work as well, is the idea that we're all in this together. And I don't think it could be further from the truth, because I don't think anyone, depending on privilege and race and where you are, is experienced this pandemic in anywhere, whether you've lost somebody, whether you haven't, how you go through this, whether you're close to the wild, whether you're in a city, there's no way that we're all in this together. There's this idea that we're all in this together, but there's no way we're going through this in the same way. And it just, but I really enjoyed the idea of the collective that Brittney has, but during the pandemic, I've just been so aware of and so frustrated by this concept that we're all in this together. So thank you. Just wanted to say that.
Thank you, Kate. And thank you, Simmons. We are all in this Zoom reading together, at least.
Yes, we are.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone. Sleep tight.
Good night. Thank you all again. Thanks to our wonderful writers.
And drive
Simmons?
home safe.
Sorry, Susan?
I said drive home safe.
Exactly.
That is
Thank
true
you
for
so much.
some of us, I think, actually. Hey, before we go, I just want to remind folks that our next reading is on March 22nd. Features National Book Award winning poet Arthur Z and the winners of the Terrain.org 11th Annual Contest in Poetry, Susan Cohen and Christina Morricone and Cameron Walker, who I saw is on here. So we hope you will tune in. Again, that's March 22nd. That you'll need registration for as well, but you can get that from the Terrain website. Thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful evening.